Hey, everybody. So I think it's time that I talk about a really strong disagreement that I have with what I think is a core evangelical belief. At least a lot of people would say that it is. And it's not something all evangelicals believe, but to a lot of people who listen to me on this channel, I think that it's probably going to sound a little surprising, and you might be tempted to write me off as a Christian. But I think I have to talk about it because I think if we get this issue wrong in certain ways, it can actually hurt people. It does hurt people. So I'm talking about the way a lot of evangelicals think about hell and the way that they talk about hell. And it's going to be a bit of a long walk to get there. But if I don't lay out my points clearly here, I don't think that you're going to understand why I think this is so important and why it relates to all these other things that I've been talking about for years. I've been writing about the dangers of the MAGA movement really for years now, and I often explain that I'm a retired evangelical pastor and a former Republican. But lately, I've been doing some pretty hard thinking about the best way that I can do this work. So I want to talk about today how I've been thinking about my former role as a pastor. And in short, here's the deal. I think that I've pulled my punches too often. I don't want my listeners to write me off somehow as like a bad pastor or a bad Christian. And it's not because I want to be liked. I've got plenty of friends. I'm not looking for friends. It's because I actually care about what I'm doing here, and I want to be listened to. So I don't want to give people undue reason to write off what I'm saying. So I've been pretty careful over the years to protect my credibility as a former evangelical pastor, as though I have to somehow earn a standing in order to point out obvious truths that I don't think should even need to be pointed out if we're honest. You know, I shouldn't have to be a pastor to say something like this. Christians ought not to support a MAGA movement that claims the name of Jesus, but whose core sacrament is the systemic ritual abuse of the other. Now, it bothers me that it matters whether I'm a pastor who believes the same things as my listeners when I say something like that, when all I'm talking about are really what I think are basic issues of good and evil. So if I were teaching on like the various modes of baptism or church polity or pastoral care, then of course my experience and my education might be helpful to those conversations. And it might matter to my listeners, in fairness, which stream of the faith that I've been swimming in. But if a person who calls himself a Christian can, for example, watch a video about the conditions in alligator Alcatraz and then buy a hat with an alligator Alcatraz logo on it, what more do I have to offer that guy than what any just standard issue, decent human being might say? A basic human being with no biblical training could look at that guy's hat and say, you should take that off because you're kind of making yourself look like an evil toad. And even as a credentialed evangelical pastor, I can't really improve on a statement like that. So sure, I could go into the Bible and find passages about how God's people ought to treat the alien in our midst. And I've done that, and I'll keep doing that. But come on, if that guy cared, he could find those passages himself because they're all over the scriptures. It's not some fancy language that's hidden in some secret part of the Bible. It's everywhere. So I think that I've been kicking against a much more basic problem. And get ready for it, because I'm about to say something that 95% of my listeners have been telling me for years. So here it is. I think that just maybe I've been trying to share the words of Jesus with some people who don't want to hear from Jesus. And I get it. A lot of you want to scream at me right now saying, finally, that's what we've been telling you. And I've always agreed with that on some level, but I just never thought the problem went as deep as it does. But now I wonder. So back to this discussion about abusing the other, for instance. As a former conservative Republican, I'm stunned that 85% of Republicans, according to a recent survey, support Donald Trump's approach to immigration. And let's be honest, we all know that most of those 85% would call themselves Christians. And every one of them, if I called them out for supporting the dehumanization of entire groups of people for political purposes, would respond with some vacuous slogan about how it's only the illegals or the criminals who are being abused. Or they might shout the name Lake and Riley at me, which happened in person a few days ago. And then they'll accuse me of being in favor of open borders, and they'll probably call me a Marxist too, which I've never been, but, I'm still young. So meanwhile, they'll ignore the thousands of statements that Trump and his lackeys have made over the past 10 years. Statements that are specifically geared toward stirring up hostility and animosity toward immigrants and refugees from the third world, or as Trump so elegantly put it, from shithole countries. So remember when he said this, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, they're eating the pets of the people who live there. I mean, that just happened during this election, and everyone saw it. And it's important to note that Trump's statement about eating the pets was about legal Haitian immigrants who were invited to the city of Springfield, Ohio to work in their factories. They weren't illegals, which is a word that I absolutely hate, but they weren't people who were here illegally. So every person who voted for Donald Trump, including the ones who call themselves Christians, either witnessed him saying that or they heard about it, and they voted for him anyway. Possibly they voted for him because of it. So again, this all has to do with my recent thinking about how I've been protecting my status as a former evangelical pastor. I've tended to avoid theological disputes because I've thought that my message is so simple. What I'm trying to share is so simple that it isn't helpful to muddy it up with side discussions about specific theological issues. But I've also chosen my words carefully, and I think maybe too carefully, around some theological issues that do have a bearing on these simple issues that I'm discussing. And I've chosen my words carefully because I haven't wanted to give people ammunition to revoke my credentialed evangelical pastor status. But just like I finally ripped off the Band-Aid and told everybody several times a while back that I don't want to talk about Trump being the Antichrist anymore, and a few thousand people stopped listening to me because of it, I guess it's time to have another one of those uncomfortable discussions here. And in this case, I'm not responding to anything anyone has said on this channel. I'm bringing this up on my own. I'm bringing it up because it's something that bothers me, all on my own. So this is, if you've ever left a comment and you think I'm responding to you, I'm not. I haven't seen that comment. So this is nothing personal towards anyone. And people are going to disagree with me on this, and I respect you and I love you, and I hope that I don't offend you. But anyway, here we go. So I said earlier that a lot of Christians don't seem to want to hear from Jesus. And I was going to say they love Christianity instead of Jesus, but I don't even think that's true. I think they appreciate the benefits that their version of Christianity offers them. And I think they're glad that some guy named Jesus let himself be crucified so they don't have to burn in hell. And for a time, I think they felt a sense of existential relief because, they've escaped that whole conscious eternal torment thing. And it's this conscious eternal torment thing where I'm going to have a disagreement with a lot of people who are listening to me right now. So, but sadly, for a lot of those American evangelicals, I think that escaping conscious eternal torment turned out to be the sole content and function of their faith. Everything else about their Christianity, for a lot of these people, is just ignorant, culturally determined signifiers that they use to separate the good people from the bad people. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about when I say a culturally determined signifier, just Google how some evangelical Republicans freaked out at Zoran Mamdani because he was eating rice with his fingers recently. So these culturally determined signifiers have nothing to do with those conservative Christians' own obedience to biblical commands. Because on virtually every survey that you can find, whether it's a survey about attitudes towards premarital sex or divorce or consumerism or pornography or whatever, conservative Christians' actual choices look remarkably similar to the rest of the culture. The gap between conservative Christians' beliefs and how they actually live is wide. And the gap between my own beliefs and the way that I actually live is much wider than I'd like it to be too. But I'm not the one who's wearing a cross around my neck and an alligator Alcatraz hat on my head and consigning people to conscious eternal torment. And I'm at least trying to remain open to correction. I see very little openness to correction from the white evangelical movement in America. I see arrogance, which I suppose is understandable since the kingdom and the power and the glory are theirs. Too many evangelicals simply said the magic words about Jesus at some point in their life. That Jesus dude who did what he did for them, and thank you very much, but now they expect him to kindly shut up about how they live. And I do have to give them credit for their deal-making skills. They've got their version of Jesus over a barrel. Whether he likes it or not, apparently he accepted their verbal terms back at summer camp all those years ago. And he signed his end of the irrevocable contract in blood. So now he owes them an eternity free of conscious eternal torment. And with their ultimate eternal destiny just locked away safely for all time, then they're free to maximize their enjoyment in this world too. And as it so happens, this world turns out to be finely tuned for the enjoyment of white American evangelicals. And furthermore, the visible wealth and the power of white American evangelicals, especially in contrast to the powerlessness and the poverty of the others, stands as a testament to white evangelical chosenness and to the everlasting, unbreakable pact that Jesus made with them. Which is why I think they have to watch Fox News and other outlets every once in a while, at least, to see scenes of the other failing at life or suffering the punishment that the others deserve. White American evangelicals have to see these things in order to remind themselves of their exalted place in the cosmically ordained order. But again, how does all of that relate to how I talk about being a former pastor? And how does it relate to the systemic, ritualized abuse of the other at the core of the MAGA movement? Here's how. Here's something that I believe with all my heart. And I know that it's going to make some of my listeners sad to hear it. I understand that. If your faith teaches you that your own personal eternal destiny as a chosen one of God is secure, but that conscious eternal torment is the consequence for billions of people who believe differently, I believe that's not only a bad interpretation of Scripture, but I think it dehumanizes entire groups of people in ways that evangelicals just haven't come to terms with. I know serious Christians who are troubled by that belief, and yet they still hold it, and I understand that. Even though I don't share that belief, I do respect the small minority of evangelical Christians who hold that belief, who have actually anguished over it. And out of that anguish over this sincerely held belief, they've turned that anguish into a lifetime of loving outreach to the lost, as they would call them. And I've got nothing but respect. If that's you, I've got nothing but respect for you. But you're in the minority of people who hold that belief. The vast, vast majority of American evangelicals hold that belief the way they do the rest of their beliefs, very loosely, and only to the extent that it benefits them. And in the case of the conscious eternal torment of those who believe differently from them, I think most American evangelicals believe that teaching with about a 4% certainty. To them, the idea of going to hell to burn forever, that's the sort of low probability, high consequence event that you buy insurance to protect yourself from. They doubt the universe really works that way. But it's best to be safe and get that insurance contract tied down while you can. But that basic teaching, whether they believe it or not, I think it plants a seed of dehumanization deep into their psyche. So when they see a person who's not like them getting kicked around, having their head roughly shaved, being put in a prison cell, to be subjected to untold atrocities. I think that they look at that and they think, well, that's nothing compared to how God treats those who didn't say the magic words at summer camp. And sure, maybe a few innocents are going to suffer in this lifetime, or even some Christians who happen to look different or eat different foods and get swept up in this stuff. But that's what heaven is for. They would say, I think that every one of their tears will be wiped away one day, those people who've been abused. So really, who of any value is harmed in the end? Sure, it's unfortunate for the vessels of wrath, but these are the necessary things that must happen in order for the riches of God's glory to be displayed to the white American evangelical vessels of mercy. And when you think about it, it's kind of great to be a white American evangelical. So anyway, I know I've stepped on a lot of toes here, and I know that what I've just criticized is not true Christian faith. I'm painting a picture of a false version of Christian faith, but it's one that millions of white American evangelicals believe. I'm not mocking true Christian faith, but I'm mocking the hell out of their faith. I hold to a form of Christian faith, and I don't claim to have a handle on what authentic faith looks like exactly, but I know that the version that I just described is not it, not even close. If someone accepts a version of reality that's even close to this satirical version of Christian faith that I just described, if they believe that and they live that way and they call that good news, then that person is at least flirting with sociopathy. And the hard thing for me to admit, the thing that when I say it out loud is going to shut the ears of any remaining MAGA pseudo-Christians who listen to me, is this. Sociopathy lies at the heart of the MAGA movement. And that sociopathy is spiritual before it's anything else. It's heretical, but it's spiritual. It leads to death. Death of conscience, death of relationship, death of emotional stability, death of love, and in many cases, actual physical death. And whether that death extends out into eternity, that's a question that's above my pay grade, and I'm not going to presume to answer that. I'm not saying that a belief in the conscious eternal torment of billions of people who don't believe the way you do by itself leads to spiritual sociopathy. That's not what I'm saying. But I've only known a few people in my life who've truly wrestled with that belief and found a way to integrate it into a life that overflows with love and joy. At best, most people, in my experience, just accept it, or they pretend to accept it so they can be a member of their church. And then they spend their lives trying not to think about it. But to the sorts of authoritarian types who are attracted to the MAGA movement, that belief system is the exact ticket that they need to excuse any atrocity their leaders might commit. So that's kind of heavy. But there you go. That's what I believe. And I always say thanks for listening, but tonight I really mean, I always do, but I really mean thanks for listening.